Welcome once again to The Curious Case. I'm Davis, and I'm so glad you're here for another quiet mystery. Tell me, where are you listening from tonight? And what's the weather like where you are? Share it in the comments. And remember to subscribe so you never miss our next evening in Street Mary Mead. Frost edged the stones. The morning was still. No footsteps yet on the path to Street Mary's. Miss Marple walked slowly, gloved hands tight around her handbag. The air bit at her cheeks. She liked that. Cold kept people honest. The churchyard gate stood half open. She reached for the latch, then paused. It moved too easily. No stiffness, no winter creak. Strange. She pressed her thumb against the hinge. Smooth, greasy, freshly oiled. The smell caught her at once, sharp, metallic, oily. Oil and cold iron. Amos Jarvis never did that. Not in December. He saved the oil for spring when everything jammed at once. She leaned closer. The gate's edge glistened faintly in the weak light. Whoever had done this had done it recently. The ground beneath the latch was clear of frost. Someone's hand had brushed it this morning. She looked down the path. No footprints yet. The church tower stood silent, waiting for the bell. Routine was her comfort. When something small changed, she noticed. Always. Inside the gate, a small tin lay near the wall, half hidden in leaves. She stooped. Black lettering. Paraffin oil. Half full. Cap still warm. She turned it gently with her cane. A man's fingerprints. Wide smudges. Not Jarvis's neat touch. He would have wiped it clean before leaving. She straightened. The cold pricked at her nose. That faint smell clung to her glove now, oil, iron, and a trace of something sweet. Boot polish. Old habit of careless men. She closed the gate behind her, listening to the soft click of the latch. Too smooth. Too easy. Someone wanted quiet entry. She stood for a long moment, watching the pout. Mist lift over the gravestones. Her eyes moved slowly from the porch to the path. Every sound mattered now. Every silence, too. A crow called once, then nothing. No one in sight. But the gate had been touched, and that meant purpose. She whispered to herself, someone prepared this gate. For a reason. Sometimes evil begins with small adjustments, oil on a hinge, silence on a path. Little things tell larger stories. If this mystery stirred your thoughts, tell me, which small clue would you have noticed first? Until next time, may truth cool slower than tea. The church smelled faintly of polish and cold stone. Light from the windows fell in quiet squares. Miss Marple moved down the aisle, her steps soft on the flagstones. Lady Bantry was already in her pew, wrapped in fur and impatience. She turned as Miss Marple passed. "Morning, Jane. Thin crowd today." Miss Marple smiled. "Cold keeps the devout at home." A sound made her pause. Something small slid from the seat ahead and touched the floor. She bent down. A folded handkerchief. White linen. A single neat monogram stitched in blue, A.M. She held it up to the light. Lavender. The scent rose faintly, clean and old-fashioned. It was the sort of perfume Agnes Miller used. The whole village knew that. Agnes and her endless lavender sachets. Lady Bantry leaned closer. Oh, that must be Agnes's. She always sits there. Miss Marple's eyes stayed on the pew. She hasn't been here for weeks. Hasn't she? I lose track. She moved to her sister's in Bath after her fall. They looked at the empty seat. A hymn book was turned slightly, as if handled recently. The dust around it disturbed. Miss Marple touched the wood, faint warmth lingered. Someone had been there this morning. Someone who knew Agnes's pew and wanted to appear unnoticed. Lady Bantry whispered, "Perhaps she's back?" "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, though she already doubted it. Agnes wrote last week. Still in Bath. Recovering slowly. The letter was clear. She turned the handkerchief over again. Lavender clung to her glove. The embroidery thread was new, too bright for Agnes's old things. A copy, then. Not hers. Someone wanted it to look familiar. She set the handkerchief back on the pew, exactly as she had found it. Then she stepped back, eyes narrowing slightly. Every church had its pattern. People sat in the same places. They left marks without meaning to. A moved hymn book, a scuff on the floor, a folded cloth. When a stranger tried to copy that rhythm, it always showed. Lady Bantry sighed. "Really, Jane, you think too much about pews." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said softly, "but people choose their seats for comfort, and habit hides many things." The bell began to toll outside. Cold air drifted from the porch. Miss Marple stayed still, her eyes on that small square of linen. She whispered, almost to herself, "So who prayed in her place? Even in quiet rooms, habits speak. A single misplaced thing can betray the calm. If this detail caught your mind, tell me, would you have noticed the handkerchief? Until next time, may truth cool slower than tea." Griselda Clement liked arriving early. It gave her time to fix her hat, smooth her gloves, and look dutiful before the service began. The church was nearly empty. Only Amos Jarvis moved about, shuffling with his ring of keys. The air held that familiar chill, stone-cold and faintly damp. She walked halfway down the aisle, stopped near the front pew, and froze. Voices, two of them, soft, urgent, half-muffled by the chancel screen. She leaned slightly, listening. The sound came from near the lectern. A whisper, then another, lower, quicker. Words hard to catch. But there was tension in the tone. One voice male, the other. She wasn't sure. Lighter. Perhaps a woman. She waited, half hidden behind a pillar. Her breath clouded faintly in the cold air. The sound stopped suddenly. Then a scrape like a shoe on stone. Only one figure appeared. Mrs. Moore Ellison, carrying her basket of chrysanthemums. No one else followed. Griselda stepped forward. "Morning, Mrs. Ellison. Talking to Amos." The woman smiled. "Just myself, my dear. The flowers never argue." Her voice calm. Too calm. She passed by, the scent of chrysanthemums thick in the still air. Griselda frowned. She knew what she'd heard. Two voices, not one. She glanced toward the lectern brass gleaming faintly. No movement there now. Only the echo of that whisper seemed to hang in the space, like a secret unwilling to leave. When Miss Marple arrived 10 minutes later, Griselda mentioned it quietly. "Two people were whispering up there, Jane. I'm sure of it." Miss Marple nodded once. "Before the bell?" "Yes. 11:15. That's when the verger goes up the tower. He couldn't have been near the lectern then." Griselda's eyes widened. "So who was?" "That," Miss Marple said, "is worth noting." The sound of the organ swelled faintly in the distance. Service would begin soon. People were drifting in now, Lady Bantry with her furs, young Mrs. Bryce with her new hat, the usual order of things. Miss Marple took her seat near the back. Her eyes followed Mrs. Ellison, who was setting down her basket by the chancel step. She worked quickly, arranging stems with quiet precision. A woman used to routine. A woman who liked control. The vicar's wife whispered again. "I heard her speaking. I know it." Miss Marple nodded. "Then we listened to what vanishes next." The bell tolled sharply above them. The first hymn began. Voices rose together, polite and steady. But in that swell of sound, something was missing. A voice that had been there moments before, now silent. Miss Marple looked toward the lectern. The brass, eagle gleamed in the weak morning light, and in her calm, steady way, she marked the time. 10 minutes before the bell. One whisper too many. She folded her hands, eyes forward, and by the first hymn, she thought, one voice was gone. Truth often disappears in quiet rooms, not with noise but with silence that follows too soon. If you had heard those whispers, would you have gone closer, or stayed still? Tell me below, and until next time may truth cool slower than tea. The service had ended. The air still carried the faint scent of polish and hymn books. People drifted out, coats rustling, voices low. Amos Jarvis stayed behind as always to tidy the pews and snuff the candles. Miss Marple lingered near the porch. She liked to watch him work. He moved slowly but with care, checking each brass stick, trimming each wick. Nothing escaped his order. He bent toward the altar. One by one, the flames vanished. Soft curls of smoke rose into the cold air. Then he stopped, frowned. The middle candle still burned. He reached with his snuffer again, pressed down. The flame died, then flickered back to life. A tiny flare. Thin, steady, stubborn. He muttered under his breath. Drafts. Always drafts. He tried again. Same thing. The candle refused to die. Miss Marple walked closer. The smell reached her first. Warm wax, faint smoke, and something else, dry heat. Not from a draught, from below. She touched the edge of the altar rail. Warm. Unnaturally warm. She withdrew her hand quickly. Amos didn't notice. He was still grumbling, eyes fixed on the flame. "Old buildings breathe funny," he said. "Air comes up through the floor." Miss Marple's gaze dropped to the stones. No breeze stirred the dust. No open window moved the curtains. But heat lingered where it shouldn't. "Strange, isn't it?" she said quietly. "Which candle, Amos?" He pointed. "Middle one. Always the middle one. I'll fetch. New wax next week." "Leave it for now," she said. He shrugged. "Suit yourself." He turned away to stack prayer books. Miss Marple bent slightly, studying the brass stand. The base was polished bright. Too bright. She traced the rim with her finger. Warm again, and faint soot on the inside edge, as if the flame had been fed from below. She looked around. The heater near the wall was off, the air cold enough to mist her breath. Yet one patch of stone by her feet showed no frost at all. Dry, warm. She pressed it with her shoe. Hollow sound. A loose flag. Something had passed beneath here recently. She didn't lift it yet, but she noted the mark, the warmth, the stubborn flame. Candles die when they're told. This one resisted. That meant control. Amos straightened from his work. "All done, miss." She nodded. Her eyes stayed on the candle. The flame held steady, small and defiant. She whispered, almost to herself. No draught could do that. Sometimes what refuses to end is not life but design. Even a flame can tell you where human hands have meddled. If you'd seen that candle burn again, what would you have thought? Tell me in the comments. And until next time, may truth cool slower than tea. By afternoon, the church was quiet again. Only the faint hum of a wasp against the window broke the stillness. Reverend Clement sat at his desk, sorting papers, trying to balance accounts for the roof fund. Miss Marple sat across from him, polite as always, knitting in her lap. He sighed, shutting his ledger. "So much ink and so few answers," he said. His fingers brushed the corner of his prayer book. A faint blue smudge caught Miss Marple's eye. She leaned forward slightly. "May I see that, Reverend?" He passed it over, puzzled. "What's the matter?" The mark was small. A fingerprint. Faint but clear enough. The color wrong. Too bright. Clement's fountain pen left dark navy stains. This was lighter, metallic, with a sheen that caught the light. She touched it with a gloved hand. Still damp. Her nose caught the sharp, metallic smell of fresh ink. She frowned. "That's odd," she murmured. "This service ended hours ago." Clement looked surprised. "It might be my own carelessness. You write with Parker Blue," she said softly. "This is royal script, the old brand the post office uses. Thinner, glossier." He blinked. "How do you notice such things?" She smiled. "Habit. I once solved a missing letter with nothing more than ink." She took a clean handkerchief from her bag, pressed it gently to the mark. When she lifted it, the blue had bled. Fresh, not dry. Someone had touched that page long after the service, long after the book should have been closed. She turned to the next page. Same faint dusting of blue, same touch, same finger pattern. Not carelessness. Deliberate. Clement stood, uneasy now. "But who would handle my book?" "Someone who wanted to leave proof," she said quietly. He frowned. "Proof of what?" She didn't answer. Her eyes moved to the pen tray on his desk. 2 pens, both full, neither leaking. She noticed a tiny drop of that same pale ink on the wooden blotter. Round, perfect, as though placed rather than spilled. Her gaze shifted toward the open window. A faint draught stirred the curtains. Below it, on the sill, a single fingerprint, faint blue again. Someone had leaned there. Someone watching. Miss Marple folded her handkerchief neatly. She placed it on the desk beside the book. "The color isn't the problem," she said softly. "It's that it hasn't dried." She stood smoothing her gloves. Ink by nature dries quickly when left alone. Only a certain mix keeps it wet, one meant for marking things permanently. For tracing. For transfer. Her eyes met his. "Lock your desk, Reverend," she said, "and leave this book as it is." He hesitated. "Why?" She turned toward the door. "Because ink that never dries, unless meant to mark. Some marks are not accidents. They're messages left in plain sight. If you saw that blue fingerprint, would you have wiped it away? Or kept it? Tell me what you'd do. And until next time, may truth cool slower than tea." By evening, the church stood empty again. Light faded through the stained glass. The air was colder now, still carrying a faint smell of polish and smoke. Amos Jarvis had gone home early. Miss Marple remained, talking quietly with Reverend Clement near the vestry. She liked quiet places after everyone left. They told more truth when no one was listening. Something caught her attention. A loose pedal at the foot of the organ. It clicked when the wind shifted. She bent slightly, then knelt. A small thing lay half-hidden beneath the lowest board. An envelope. Dust clung to it. Edges curled with damp. Across the front, 3 words in rushed, uneven ink. W. Jarvis, urgent. She brushed the dust aside gently. The old wood smell rose up dry, sharp, and ancient. Like hymn books forgotten in storage, the envelope was sealed with paste, not gum. Rough work. Hasty. Reverend Clement turned. "Found something, Miss Marple?" "Perhaps," she said softly. She lifted the envelope to the light. It was heavier than paper alone. Flat, but weighted. He came closer. "Jarvis? The verger?" She nodded. "It appears so." "May I?" She shook her head. Best to open it carefully. The flap came loose with one firm press. Inside a check. Half torn across the middle. Signature missing. Top half still intact. The bank stamp faint. Old. A week perhaps. Clement frowned. Strange place for a payment. "Stranger without a name," she said. He peered closer. The handwriting on the check matched the envelope. Jarvis's full name on the pay line, but no sign of who issued it. "Maybe a donation for the fund?" She smiled faintly. Donations rarely hide. She turned the envelope inside out. A small flake of red wax fell from the seam. Unusual for church correspondence. More suited to personal secrecy. Clement sighed. Jarvis would never take money he shouldn't. "No," she agreed. But perhaps he was meant to refuse it. She laid the pieces flat on the desk. The torn edge was jagged, deliberate. Someone didn't want it deposited, only found. A warning. Or an offer. She folded the check back into the envelope and set it aside. Her gloved fingers brushed the wooden floor where it had lain. No dust there. Someone had placed it only hours ago. And not Jarvis. He never went near the organ. The faint scent of oil and wax lingered, mixed with that musty wood. It told her enough. Someone who moved quietly. Someone who worked with hands. Reverend Clement spoke softly. "What do you think it means?" She looked toward the shadows behind the organ pipes. "That depends," she said, "on whether it was meant to pay or silence. Money never tells the truth by itself, but where it hides, it always leaves a reason. If you'd found that envelope, would you have opened it or left it where it lay? Tell me what you'd do, and until next time, may truth cool slower than tea." Morning broke grey and still. A thin frost clung to the church windows. Inside, Miss Marple waited near the vestry, her gloves folded neatly beside her. Amos Jarvis was late again. Dr. Haydock had come early for the parish health drive. He was cheerful as usual, with a smell of tobacco and soap. He checked his watch, then his patience. Jarvis promised to have the heater going, he muttered. Miss Marple smiled lightly. Promises are easier kept in summer. The vestry felt colder than usual. The air held a faint trace of something burned. Not wood, not paper. Different. Sharper. She stepped closer, to the wall where the old iron heater Saturday dust thick on its surface. No sign of use. Still that scent persisted. Burnt leather. She bent down slowly. Behind the baseboard, a small corner of brown cloth stuck out. Not cloth leather. She drew it free. A glove, child-sized. Fingers stiff, edge singed black. Doctor. Haydock looked over her shoulder. Where'd you find that? Behind your heater, she said quietly. He frowned, taking it carefully. The smell grew stronger, burnt leather, faintly sweet. He turned it over in his hands. Small, choir boys perhaps. They all wear these cheap ones in winter. Miss Marple nodded. Left or right? Right, he said. She thought for a moment. Choir boys hold hymn books in their left. That means this fell during use. He raised an eyebrow. You really observe everything, don't you? It's easier than guessing, she said. He peered at the burn mark again. Fresh, he murmured. The edges haven't gone brittle, maybe a few hours old. She looked at him sharply. Hours? Yes, still smells of oil. Heat caught it recently. She turned toward the heater. The metal was cold to the touch. No sign of recent fire. No ash, no warmth, no spark. She tapped the pipe leading down to the floor. Hollow sound. Not connected to fuel. Disconnected years ago. Then it wasn't the heater, she said softly. He frowned. Then what scorched it? She looked toward the far wall where the altar wiring ran through. Something electrical. Something that shouldn't be hot at all. He shook his head. You think this ties to the accident last week? She folded the glove gently. Accident is a generous word, Doctor. They both stood silent for a moment. The cold pressed in. That burnt smell still lingered faintly in the air. Unnatural. Deliberate. Miss Marple placed the glove in her handbag. I'll keep this safe, she said. He nodded slowly. Do you know what it means? She looked at the silent heater again. Yes, she said. Something burned where it shouldn't have. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Yet no one had lit the heater. Heat can come from many sources, not all meant for warmth. Even small burns reveal unseen fires. If you'd found that glove, would you have smelled danger or dismissed it as nothing? Tell me what you'd think. And until next time, may truth cool slower than tea. Reverend Clement disliked paperwork. He called it the true cross of ministry. Still, every month he sat down with his ledger. Miss Marple joined him that afternoon, her tea cooling beside the inkstand. The room smelled of old books and paper dust. The sun slanted weakly through the window, touching the edge of his spectacles. He adjusted them, frowning. These receipts never line up, he muttered. Miss Marple leaned forward. Which receipts, Reverend? He turned the ledger toward her. Roof fund, paid invoices for tiles and nails. Ordinary things. She glanced at the open page. 2 slips tucked between the entries. She drew them out carefully. The paper crackled dryly, old but not brittle. The faint sound reminded her of dried leaves. She laid both receipts side by side. Same amount, same supplier, same date, but not the same hand. Clement blinked. Good heavens, I hadn't noticed. She nodded slightly. The number forms differ. One rounded, one sharp. Look at the 7s. He peered closer. You're right. And here, she said, tapping the signature line. One signed in ink, one in pencil. He rubbed his chin. I always sign in ink. Yes, she said quietly. Someone copied you poorly. She turned the first receipt over. Clean back. The second. Faint smear of graphite. Traced, perhaps. She smiled faintly. Forgers often forget what paper remembers. He shifted uneasily. But why would anyone fake a roof payment? Because small thefts hide best in honest accounts, she said. She checked the ledger again. One entry for the first receipt, neatly recorded. The second slipped behind the next month's page, half hidden, filed just deep enough to vanish. Someone knew the rhythm of this man's bookkeeping. Someone who worked close to him. Clement exhaled slowly. I can't believe anyone from the parish. She raised a hand. Belief and proof rarely walk together. She folded both slips neatly, lining the edges. The forger had been careful, but not careful enough. Tiny differences spoke louder than words: ink shade, number pressure, paper fold, and always the human trace that logic couldn't disguise. She glanced toward the window. Outside, the bell tower shadow cut across the courtyard. A quiet hour in a quiet day, the kind where deception feels safe. Reverend, she said softly, do you recall who handled these last? He thought. Mrs. Ellison, perhaps. She assists with records when Amos is busy. Miss Marple nodded once. Then we shall begin with her. She slipped both receipts into her small notebook. Her fingers brushed the brittle edges. Paper told stories. It always did. She closed the ledger gently. One record was duty, she said. The other was intent. Her voice dropped to a whisper. One honest, one forged. Truth doesn't always hide in shadows. Sometimes it sits in plain sight, written twice. If you found two receipts alike but not the same, would you question them? Tell me your thought below. And until next time, may truth cool slower than tea. The morning began quietly. Light frost on the path. No wind, no movement, just the slow toll of the church bell. Miss Marple met Amos Jarvis near the side gate. He carried his usual ring of keys, 20 or so, clinking softly against his belt. She greeted him kindly. Early? Start today, Amos. He nodded. Vicar wants the heater looked at again. Never works right since that fuse blew. He reached for the keys automatically, glancing down. Something in his expression shifted. He frowned. Now that's odd. Miss Marple waited. One missing, he murmured. He turned the ring in his hand. They're always in order. Chapel door, vestry, tower, fuse cupboard. But the last's gone. She stepped closer. Are you sure it isn't in your coat? He shook his head. I checked. Always carry them on me. Habit of 30 years. The keys jingled faintly, that metallic rhythm she knew by ear. She could tell one ring gap was empty. Even the weight felt wrong. Old brass made a certain sound. When one link was new, the tone changed. She looked down at his belt. A brass blank key hung where the missing one should be. Smooth, unused, no cuts on the edge. A perfect decoy. Strange, she said softly. You've replaced it? He looked surprised. No, ma'am. I've never seen that one before. She nodded slowly. Then someone has been through your keys. He rubbed his forehead. I never lend them out. Except, well, Mrs. Ellison had them last week to open the supplies cupboard. Only for a minute. Miss Marple's tone stayed even. A minute is often long enough. They walked toward the vestry. Jarvis tried each key out of habit. Every lock clicked in turn, except one. The fuse cupboard door refused to open. He tugged the handle. No use. It stuck. Miss Marple studied the lock. Small scratches around the keyhole. Fresh ones. Someone had tried a copy. Not quite right. She turned to him quietly. Do you keep spares? He shook his head. Only the one set. Reverend's too cautious to allow another. Then whoever took it, she said, had purpose, not curiosity. He swallowed hard. You think this connects to the accidents? She didn't answer. Her eyes were on that brass blank key, so neat, so deliberate, so wrong. The metallic sound of the remaining keys echoed faintly in the empty aisle. A cold little sound, like a warning. Miss Marple listened to it, eyes narrowing slightly. Locks protect things, she said at last. But sometimes, Amos, what they guard isn't meant to be opened. She placed the false key on the altar rail. The chill metal glinted dully under the weak morning light, a symbol of intrusion, of intent. Her voice softened. Someone borrowed safety itself. Trust often hides behind small metals and familiar habits, but safety borrowed is safety lost. If you found a missing key replaced by a blank one, would you see danger or mistake it for forgetfulness? Tell me your thought below, and until next time, may truth cool slower than tea. The church was quiet again. Dust hung in the air, soft and still. Miss Marple moved slowly down the center aisle, cane tapping lightly on the stone. Morning light fell through colored glass, dim and thin. She paused near the front pew. The aisle runner had shifted slightly. One corner curled. Amos Jarvis had straightened it yesterday. Now it was loose again. She bent down, lifting it just enough to see beneath. A faint smear ran along the edge of the floor. Brown, dull, greasy. She touched it gently. The smell rose up sharp and waxy, unmistakable. Boot polish. She rubbed a bit between her fingers. Still soft. Fresh. She frowned. No one polished shoes inside a church. And no one crawled along the aisle without reason. The wire beneath caught her eye. Thin. Dust-coated except for one stretch, the part marked by the brown smear. Someone had rubbed it clean deliberately, and aged it again. She traced the mark slowly with her finger. Dr. Haydock's words returned to her mind. Heat where there shouldn't be heat. Burnt leather. Scorched glove. She followed the wire toward the wall. It disappeared under the kneeler near the fuse cupboard. She straightened. Her knees ached, but her mind stayed sharp. That wire had been tampered with. The polish wasn't random. It was disguise. Old trick from the war, dull, bright metal with wax to make it look untouched. She looked toward the pulpit. The congregation sat there every Sunday, feet inches from danger, never knowing. Someone clever had hidden the line in plain sight. Not for decoration, for conduct. Amos entered quietly behind her. Still looking, miss. She nodded. Did you ever polish anything inside? He laughed. Inside? Never. Why? She lifted her gloved hand, brown stain visible on the fingertip. This polish doesn't belong to the floor. He stared at it. That's strange. Yes, she said softly, and it smells fresh. He leaned down, sniffed the air. Wax and turpentine, not mine. Her gaze moved to his boots, scuffed grey with dust. No shine. Not his polish. Not his doing. She looked at the path of the wire again, hidden under years of wear. But someone had made it look old. A trick of trust. People see what they expect, she said quietly. They never question what looks the same. Amos rubbed his hands nervously. Should we tell the Reverend? In time, she said. For now we watch who steps near that wire. Her fingers brushed it once more. Cold metal beneath wax. New intent beneath old dust. She rose, eyes calm, but certain. Old wire, she whispered, newly aged. Deception often hides beneath familiarity. When something looks comfortably old, it can blind even careful eyes. If you saw that faint smear on the floor, would you notice it or walk past it? Tell me what you'd think. And until next time, may truth cool slower than tea. The next morning came pale and quiet. A thin drizzle misted the churchyard. Inside, the air was colder than usual. Miss Marple moved carefully. Between the pews, eyes tracing the aisle she had walked 100 times. She liked patterns. Where they broke, truth slipped through. Something felt wrong this morning. The smell first. Not polish. Not wax. A faint, sharp tang that didn't belong here. She bent slightly. Near the second pew, a kneeler had darkened. Damp. Edges glittered faintly where sunlight touched them. She touched the cloth. Cool. Sticky at the edge. She drew back her hand and looked at her fingers. Tiny grains clung to her glove. White. Coarse. Salt. She tasted the air again. Yes, sharp. Sea-like. Unmistakable. Salt and damp stone. But Street Mary Mead was miles from the coast. No sea wind ever entered these walls. She knelt down, ignoring the ache in her knees. With her cane tip, she scraped a bit of the residue into a folded paper slip. The sound was faint, the gritty crackle of dry salt against wood. She sniffed again. Salt water, mixed with something faintly metallic, not seawater, made by hand. Amos Jarvis entered just then, carrying a bucket. He stopped, puzzled. "Cleaning, miss?" "Observing," she said calmly. "Have you noticed any leaks?" He looked up toward the roof. "Not a drop. Dry as ever." "Then this water came from the ground," she said softly. He frowned. "Condensation?" "No, deliberate." She folded the paper carefully, slipping it into her bag. Amos watched her uneasily. Strange stuff to find under pews. "Yes," she said, "and stranger still to find it twice." He blinked. "Twice?" She pointed to the far side. Another patch. Smaller, same glitter. He followed her gesture and bent low. "You're right." He rubbed the wood, still wet. Miss Marple looked toward the aisle, mind working quietly. Salt water near wiring, boot polish on the line, heat where none should be. Patterns forming, quietly but surely. Each detail small, alone meaningless, together intent. She turned to Amos. "Have you seen anyone near the pews before service?" He shook his head. "Only Mrs. Ellison with the flowers, and that new boy from the shop helps her lift things." Her voice remained mild, but her eyes sharpened. She had seen that boy near the gate the day the latch was oiled. He had carried a parcel then, a tin shape. She looked again at the glittering Neela. The salt had sunk deep into the cloth, forming pale crusts. Not spilled water, a trail, a conductor. She rose, brushing her skirt lightly. Amos waited, expecting more questions. She simply said, "Keep the church locked tonight." Locked. Why? Because someone is testing how close heat travels through faith. Her gaze returned to the floor. The faint shimmer caught the light again. She spoke under her breath. "Salt and water, always for purpose. Even pure things can serve dark intent. Salt cleanses, but it also conducts. If you found that damp shimmer beneath a pew, would you notice danger or just dust? Tell me your thought below. And until next time, may truth cool slower than tea." Late afternoon. The church was empty again. Cold light filtered through the windows, dull and grey. Miss Marple stood beside the fuse cupboard, waiting for Amos Jarvis to return with the new bulbs. She had asked to see the wiring herself. He'd smiled nervously, as men often did when women asked about tools, but he fetched the keys anyway. Now she waited. Her eyes followed the faint path of the wire along the wall, the same one she'd seen under the aisle runner. It disappeared neatly into the cupboard beside the organ pipe. Everything looked proper. Too proper. The air near the door felt slightly warmer than the rest of the room. Not hot, just a low, steady heat. Enough to warn her that electricity still moved somewhere inside. Amos came back, jingling keys. "Best not touch anything, miss," he said. "Won't." "Touch," she replied. "Only look." He opened the cupboard. The metal latch clicked softly. A faint hum met her ear alive, constant, waiting. Inside, a small wooden board lined with fuses and wires, each labeled neatly in his handwriting. She bent closer. One looked different, shinier, too bright against the dull grey metal. She pointed. "This one?" "Yes, ma'am. That's the main heater line. Fuse blew last week. I replaced it myself." She tilted her head. "With what?" "A penny," he said simply. "Old trick. Keeps it running. Fuse wires scarce these days." She said nothing for a moment. Her hand hovered over the metal. A faint warmth touched her glove. It wasn't just current. It was danger contained. She stepped back slightly. "Show me," she said. He looked puzzled. "Show you? How you fixed it." He unscrewed the small holder and turned it toward her. There it was, a bright new penny. Clean, perfectly wedged in place. No patina, no wear. Minted recently. Not something from Amos's pocket. She looked up at him calmly. "You said you used an old one." "I did. From my key drawer. A 1,928. This," she said, "is a 1,940. Someone changed it." He froze. Changed it? She nodded. And the wire around it? Not mine either, he whispered. She leaned forward again. The metal hummed faintly. The air smelled faintly scorched, though the church was cold. Not enough to burn, just enough to warn. This bypasses the fuse entirely, she said softly. Safety removed. The next surge, Amos, and this place would glow like a lantern. He swallowed hard. You think someone meant to? Yes, she said. Accidents don't mint new pennies. She closed the cupboard door gently. The latch clicked again, too calm for what it held inside. Electricity. Silent. Ready. Her voice lowered to a whisper. The current waited. For a touch. What? Seems clever can be deadly when used without conscience. Even a penny can turn safety into danger. If you saw that coin where a fuse should be, would you remove it or trust it worked well enough? Tell me what you'd think. And until next time, may truth cool slower than tea. Afternoon sunlight faded behind clouds. The church smelled of flowers and polish. Mrs. Ellison worked, as she always did, arranging chrysanthemums near the altar, quiet and steady. Miss Marple entered softly. The door closed with a low creak that echoed through the still air. The smell was strong today. Chrysanthemums. Sharp, clean, almost bitter. They filled the space with a sweetness that didn't comfort. Cold air slipped through the window cracks. It carried that scent like a warning. Mrs. Ellison looked up and smiled politely. Afternoon, Miss Marple. You've come to see the new arrangement. Miss Marple nodded. They're lovely. Quite perfect. You must have had help. The woman hesitated for a moment, then bent to trim a stem. Her scissors clicked softly, measured and neat. I like my work exact, she said. Yes, Miss Marple replied. Exactness tells much about a person. Mrs. Ellison didn't answer. Her hands moved quickly, a rhythm that spoke of practice and nerves. Miss Marple watched quietly, noting the tremor in her wrist. After a moment she said, Strange thing about the check we found. Mrs. Ellison froze. Her scissors stopped mid-cut. Oh? It was addressed to Jarvis. Torn in half. Found under the organ. The woman straightened. Colour drained slightly from her face. Miss Marple continued gently. The handwriting matched yours. A beat of silence. Then Mrs. Ellison gave a small laugh. I helped the Reverend sometimes. Copies, ledgers, nothing more. Of course, Miss Marple said. Except the ink was yours too, the same you use for the flower notes. The scissors slipped from her hand. They hit the floor with a small metallic tap. She bent to pick them up, but Miss Marple was quicker. Leave them, she said softly. Her tone stayed kind, almost maternal. Mrs. Ellison, people make mistakes, sometimes for others, sometimes to keep peace. The woman's lips pressed together. Her eyes glistened. Miss Marple went on. Your son, perhaps, the one with the motor debts. The silence deepened. Only the faint hum of the organ pipes broke it. Finally the woman spoke, voice small, cracking at the edge. He promised he'd pay it back. Just needed a little time. I thought if the fund showed less one week, more the next, no one would notice. Miss Marple nodded slowly. You meant kindness, but you opened a door. Someone else walked through. Mrs. Ellison covered her face with her hands. I didn't know it would go this far, she whispered. No one ever does, Miss Marple said. The chrysanthemums shook slightly as the window draught passed. The perfume thickened, cloying now. Miss Marple touched the woman's shoulder gently. Courage begins when truth starts breathing again. But Mrs. Ellison's voice faltered, then stopped completely. Her hands trembled, fingers tight around her apron. The truth hung between them, fragile, final. Her voice trembled, then vanished. Good intentions often build the quietest traps. Kindness without thought can lead where deceit never meant to go. If you were Mrs. Ellison, would you have told the truth sooner or kept silent to protect your own? Tell me below. And, until next time, may truth cool slower than tea. Rain began before dusk. Soft at first, then steady. The sound tapped gently against the stained glass windows of Street Mary's. Inside, the pews filled again, but not for worship. The Reverend stood near the pulpit, uneasy. Inspector Graves sat in the front row, notebook ready. Mrs. Ellison sat pale and still beside Lady Bantry. Amos. Jarvis twisted his hat between his hands. Miss Marple stood near the aisle, quiet as always, waiting until everyone had settled. The rain kept its rhythm, a calm percussion of truth about to surface. She spoke gently. We are gathered to understand what truly happened here. A man died not by chance but by design. No one moved. Only the ticking clock near the vestry door. She continued. It began with a gate, oiled carefully, prepared for quiet entry. Not Amos's doing. Someone wanted silence that morning. Heads turned toward Mrs. Ellison. Her eyes stayed down. Miss Marple went on. Next came the handkerchief. Marked AM, placed to suggest someone who wasn't there. That set the pattern. Appearances, shaped to mislead. She took a small folded note from her bag, the drawing she'd made of the wiring. From there, the details align. Salt under the pews, a wire rubbed with polish, a fuse replaced by a penny. She paused. The salt water was a conductor, laid carefully where the kneelers rest. When the current passed through that wire, it reached anyone who touched the metal base. The verger first, the altar next, and then, by timing, the man meant to die. Inspector Graves spoke quietly. You mean the organist? Yes, she said. Mr. Sykes. He touched the brass stand during the first hymn. The circuit completed then. The rain softened again, tapping steady against the colored glass. It filled the silence between her words. She turned toward Mrs. Ellison. You didn't plan the killing. You only borrowed from the fund. But someone else used your absence, your key, and your guilt. The woman wept quietly. Who? The Reverend asked. Miss Marple looked toward the back of the church. The new boy, hired to help with flowers. Her son's debt collector's errand. He placed the penny, ran the wire, and left the envelope to frame Jarvis. He was seen near the gate that morning. Gasps broke the still air. Amos shook his head slowly. I never knew. Miss Marple's tone stayed soft. Few do. Evil here didn't shout. It whispered through routine. The inspector stood. We'll find the boy. Miss Marple nodded. He will run, but not far. Conscience travels poorly in bad weather. The church seemed smaller now. Rain still fell. Each tap against the glass like a heartbeat slowing. Miss Marple looked up once more. The pieces fit. The gate, the oil, the wire, the salt. All simple things. Each harmless, alone. Together, one design. She closed her notebook. Her voice, calm but final. One touch, one prayer, one death. Evil rarely enters through grand doors. It slips through habits, quiet, unnoticed, familiar. Would you have seen the pattern sooner, or believed the piece too deeply? Tell me your thought below, and until next time, may truth cool slower than tea. Evening settled softly over Street Mary Mead. The rain had stopped. Only the ticking of the mantel clock filled the quiet sitting room. Miss Marple sat near the fire, knitting half-finished on her lap. The teapot steamed gently beside her. The scent of bergamot filled the air, calm, familiar, steady. Across from her, Lady Bantry stirred her cup, thoughtful and uneasy. I still can't believe it, Jane, she said at last. All that wickedness, in our own church. Miss Marple smiled faintly. Wickedness seldom travels far. It usually prefers short walks. Lady Bantry sighed. You saw what none of us did. I only watched what people repeated, Miss Marple said. Habits tell you who someone truly is, and who's pretending. She poured fresh tea, the faint clink of porcelain marking the pause between thoughts. Outside, wind rustled the hedge. The house smelled of rain and wool and quiet content. The boy was clever, Lady Bantry murmured. He used what everyone trusted, even the church itself. Yes, Miss Marple replied. Goodness can hide in habit, and evil can borrow its shape. For a while neither spoke. The fire crackled softly, the room warm but not heavy. Lady Bantry leaned back. I wonder how you knew it was the boy. The clue was simple, Miss Marple said. The penny. She set down her cup. The Reverend used only old coins. I checked his drawer the day before, but the penny in that fuse was new one he'd never have touched. The boy used a fresh coin from change. He never thought age mattered. Lady Bantry smiled faintly. You notice what others never think of. Miss Marple shook her head. Only what's too small to seem important. The fire dimmed slightly, wood shifting in the grate. Miss Marple looked toward the window. Rain had left streaks on the glass, catching the lamplight in quiet lines. One secret ends, she said softly. But truth never leaves quietly. Lady Bantry nodded slowly. I suppose peace returns now. Miss Marple smiled again, gentle, knowing. For a while, she said, until it's time to notice something else. The clock chimed once. Evening complete. The knitting resumed. And the village, for now, safe again. Goodness can hide in habit, and evil can borrow its shape. Both wear the same smile until someone looks closely. Thank you for listening. If this mystery lingered with you, tell me, which clue gave it away first? Until next time, may truth cool slower than tea.